Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit, what is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious, Episode 3. Real horror stories from Reddit, r/AskReddit. I have a fear of spiders because of a hunting trip I took with my dad and family when I was a kid. I do not enjoy shooting things, not an animal rights activist, but I think killing for game or bragging rights and not for food is wasteful and barbaric. I had brought my Game Boy, and they stationed me at one of the ground blinds so I could use the radio to tell the others if I saw any deer headed their way. I got bored and got tired of grinding in Pokemon, so I turned off my game and started rifling through my backpack to find another. As I did this, I heard a strange whooshing sound that sounded remarkably close, but I could not find anything. I walked around outside the blind, and as I came around the backside, I saw that the entire outer wall was covered in a mass of interlinked daddy long-leg spiders. I considered running like hell, but I had no idea where the camp was. I had been driven out to the blind. My solution was to use my can of off and the lighter from my backpack to blowtorch all the spiders off. Because stupid, that is why. The plan backfired because I made the mistake of standing downwind of the spiders. The second the fire hit them, they all let go and flew at me. The entire wall of them. Flaming, flying, spiders. I immediately started screaming and rolling around on the ground. I took off all my clothes and immediately phoned my dad on the radio and told him to get me and that we were going home. I have never sworn or cried so profusely in my life. I eventually went through therapy regarding this event, and now I just hate spiders in general and prefer not to be around them.
One night when I was 13 years old, I had gotten my period for the first time and ended up sleeping on my back. I am an avid side sleeper, so this is a weird position for me. I was dreaming, and in that dream, I was sitting in a chair. I leaned it back on its back legs, and suddenly the chair started to slowly lean further and further back until I drifted into the eternity below me. This freaked me out, and I jolted awake. When I awoke, there was a figure leaning/hovering directly above my face, and all I saw was a hooded white, flat, ovular, and featureless face with big, ovular glassy eyes and an expression like it was determined to devour my eternal soul. The face was humanoid, very two-dimensional with thin, quivering angry lips and two holes where its nose would be, with eyebrows arched high up onto its forehead. I could feel an unworldly hate burning right through me as it loomed over me. It was absolutely the most helpless I have ever felt and would ever feel, because it was more than just my life I felt was at stake. I tried to move, scream, breathe, anything, and could not. It was paralyzing me with its hate. I finally was able to let out the tiniest whimper, and as soon as the sound escaped me, it stood straight up and paced back and forth at the foot of my bed, still staring. It was like a force field was erected around me, and the frustration of it trying to get at me again was radiating throughout the room. It looked like a starving tiger behind glass, longing to lunge at its vulnerable prey, if only it were not for the barrier between us. It was tall, all the way to the ceiling tall, and very thin. Wearing a long black cloak that covered everything except that terrifying face. I realized that it had not been floating over me. It had stood at the foot of my bed and leaned over it to hover its face over mine. I sat up in my bed, still frozen, just staring at it. My closet door behind it was cracked a few inches, and it swooped in there and peered out at me, never having broken eye contact. It continued to stare, quivering with hate and frustration until it slowly faded away. I turned my light on, and it stayed on at night for a long time. I never slept with that closet door open again, and I did not sleep again that night. I stayed the night in the living room with all the lights on, just sitting on the couch. I later dismissed it as sleep paralysis for several years. It was a very believable and plausible explanation. Then I became friends with a girl who confided in me and told me a story. She was up late at night by herself with her door open. Something out in the living room by the kitchen caught her eye, and when she looked at it, she saw a figure standing there, beckoning her to approach it. She looked away, refocused on it, and it was still there. When she described it, she described the exact same creature that had attacked me. We each got a sketchbook and drew what we saw, and when she showed me hers, I was staring at my attacker all over again. She had never heard my story before telling hers. TL, Dar, was attacked by a scary figure one night. Dismissed it as sleep paralysis until a friend described the exact same creature to me that had plagued her. She did not know about my experience until after she had told me about hers. I am having a tough time finding exactly what I saw, but this face is similar. Just flatten the nose/cheekbones into nothing and close the mouth into a thin line with bigger, more rounded eyes.
When I was in nursing school long ago, there was a lady that did not want to be resuscitated. Later she became altered, and her family gained power attorney over her. They changed her code status from DNR to full code even though that was not their mother's wishes. Since they had power attorney over her, we had to follow the children's wishes. The lady went into VFib with no pulse or breathing. We started CPR till the code chart arrived at the bedside. The doctor went to administer a shock, but the machine failed. He tried repeatedly. The machine would not deliver the shock. The minute she passed on, the machine worked. The hospital checks the defibrillator daily and it not working has never ever happened before. In the end, the lady ended up getting her wish of no resuscitation. Everyone was freaked out over this. I have been a nurse 20 years and never seen this happen before.
When I was 22, I decided to move in with my equally poor boyfriend. Unfortunately, poor plus poor still equals mostly poor. But not so destitute that we could not afford an apartment in a college town. We happily moved into our little one-bedroom, first-floor apartment. Sure, it had problems. The lead-based paint was so thick we were sure we could survive a nuclear attack. The bathroom did not have a vent. Instead, it had a window in the shower. The appliances were from the time of my grandmother, but it was home. Our home. We loved it. My boyfriend worked the graveyard shift, and I worked days, so we spent a lot of time apart. That meant that when we were together, we enjoyed the simple things in life. A lot of naked time. Over time, when I was waking up and taking my morning shower, my boyfriend, who was just getting home, realized that he could come up to our open shower window and sneak a peek. I always caught him. It was wholesome fun and we laughed. Eventually I started to notice there was a long-standing upright outside of that window. I continually asked him why he would need that. He was tall enough already. He would claim it was not his and move it away when I went outside to show him. Yet every few days, it would move right back. The guys who cared for the yard were there several times a week, so they must have just been moving it back out of the way against the building. Finally, before the snow fell, the yard workers cleared away all the yard debris and we went on in peaceful oblivion, candy-coated, love-filled oblivion. Time went on and our lease was up, but there was a great special at our cheap apartment complex. We could now rent 2 bedrooms, even cheaper than our 1 bedroom. We happily signed the new lease. The only real problem was that our 1-bedroom apartment was on a nice suburban street, facing houses, so we never really noticed how bad our neighborhood was. We were moved to the other end of the community, behind an abandoned strip mall. Our front yard consisted of a dark alley and some dumpsters behind a recently vacated Chinese buffet where a lot of stray cats seemed to live. None of this mattered in our dimly lit front yard though. Our apartment was super cheap and super huge. What more could we ask for? That year, We were so happy that my boyfriend went to buy me a ring on Valentine's Day. Being young and giddy in love, he was not able to keep the secret, and I told him yes before he could even ask the question. He did not have a lot of money, so he bought a ring with the help of a friend's father who owned a jewelry store. He got a decent price, but with the drop in price, so comes a drop in attention to detail. I was devastated when he brought home the ring, along with our wedding band set, to find out that someone had mistaken my very tiny 4-ring size with a 12. My rings were made for monster hands. What a terrible way to start our engagement. They needed to go back, so he put them in his glove box, but then a snowstorm prevented him from taking them back that day. The next day, he went to his car to find that it had been broken into. Nothing had been taken, except the rings from the glove box. We never did have the money to replace them. We personally went to every pawn shop in the area, and everybody said they had not seen anything. I began to be jealous any time I would see a woman with large fingers wearing a silver ring with Celtic knotwork. I kept telling myself that her deadbeat boyfriend stole my ring to give to that woman. Winter passed and summer came. With the summer came the warm breezes and the fresh air through our open windows. What the summer did not bring was more money, not for us and not for the city. We lost our phone service for non-payment, but it did not matter. The only people we talked to were each other anyway. Meanwhile, the city cut police and even closed a few stations, most of them in our neighborhood. It did not matter though. Summer days are long, and our dingy little corner of the community was not at all intimidating in the daylight. One night my husband-to-be turned in for the night early, and so I decided that after a long day, what I really needed was a nice soak in the bath. I walked into the bathroom and began to run the water, adding my bath salts and bubble bath. I opened the window for that nice summer breeze and took off my clothes and dumped them in a pile by the open bathroom door. I then grabbed my laptop to set on the closed toilet seat so I could relax in the tub with a movie. This would be at least 2 hours of pure bliss. Nothing beats a long soak in my book. I turned the volume up on my laptop and relaxed the hours away with one movie and then another. What must have been 4 hours later, I pulled the plug on the drain and sat while the water swirled away. I slowly stood up and stretched and dried off, the now cool night air hitting my face through the window. I figured I would just leave that open though. The apartment could use the airing out. I stepped out of the tub and across the bathroom. I did not bother to move my pile of clothes, instead stepping around them in a manner to get out the partially opened bathroom door. This move put me looking back into the bathroom, right out the window, where I saw a tall man. At first, I was startled, but quickly realized it was just my fiancé playing a trick on me, like he used to do at our old apartment. Then I saw his eyes, up too high in the window, and everything in my head began to swim. I could not scream. I could not move. I could only stand there, naked, and stare. Then everything came into startling detail. He was standing up on something so high up that I could see his full torso in the window. His full torso and his penis. There was a man outside my window jerking off. The motion drew my attention to his hand. Everything happened in a split second after I saw him, while I was frozen to the spot. I noticed he was wearing a silver ring with Celtic knotwork on it. I made a mental note of ways to identify him as I finally unfroze and ran to the bedroom. "There's a man outside the bathroom window," I said so fast my fiancé could not understand as he woke up. "What?" he asked. I repeated, "There's a man outside the bathroom window. He is jerking off. He was watching me. Oh my God, make him go away." I was finally in hysterics as everything sunk in. That man could have been there, hovering over me for hours. The only thing separating us was a thin screen. When I had stood up, his penis was inches from my face, his body towering over me. I just kept covering myself with blankets and telling my fiancé to make him go away. By the time my fiancé woke up and went to check on the situation, nobody was anywhere around. There was only a log, standing upright like a step, outside our bathroom window. In the aftermath, we filed a police report but had no phones to call, so had to drive a good 20 minutes away to do so. Then they did not have enough forces to do anything about the situation anyway. We did not have the money to break our lease. Instead, we spent the rest of the year living in fear. I covered every window with black contact paper. I wedged boards into every window so they could not be opened. The bathroom window never again opened. I never left without pepper spray. I never left after dark. But for the rest of that year, most nights, I would hear a faint noise outside our bedroom window, which was next to our bathroom. In the morning when my fiancé would check it out, there would be imprints in the ground, as if somebody had recently been standing there. I wish I could say this is just a story. I wish I could say that. But it is all the truth of 3 long years of my life. I still cannot sleep at night.
That is creepy, but at the same time I am glad she got her wish. My grandpa made it noticeably clear to all of us that if he was not going to make it to let him pass. He even said it the last time I saw him in the hospital. When the time came, my grandmother and mom and aunt and uncle were not ready, so they allowed him to be intubated. I was so mad at them. They lied about the state of his health, claimed the doctor put off talking to them. It was all lies. I had just been through it. My daughter was born at 29 weeks, and we knew something was wrong, but not what. We found out she had trisomy 18. She had been declining and there was no way she could make it through the night. The last thing I wanted was to let her go, but I could not let her suffer and I could not let her die alone in a incubator. I held her until she passed. It killed me to do, but I did it because I wanted to do right by her. The fact that my family was so selfish still makes me so angry. I did not want to lose him either, but keeping him alive and extra weeks was not right. He died 4 months to the day of my daughter's funeral. It was a tough time. When it is someone's time to go, it is their time.
When I was in elementary school, my family decided to add on to our house. So, we hired an architect and contractor. We live in an old colonial home that was built to be historically correct, i.e., 200-year-old softwood floors, proper paint colors, etc. Because of this, my parents chose to have all the wood trim painted in the addition. The contractor did not want to because we bought quality wood, and he thought it was a waste of time. So, we ended up hiring another contractor after about a year of arguing and having almost no work done on the house, even though the contractor and his team were consistently being paid. The new contractor was one that my parents' lawyer had met through church. Most of his team also went to that same church. Now, we always tried to be hospitable towards the workers and would offer them drinks and snacks, particularly in the summer. We live in a hot, humid climate that is unbearable. So, my mom would send me outside with lemonade and the like for the workers. They were all nice, and I remember having nice conversations with them about whatever now 9-year-old me found interesting. I particularly remember this one guy named Kenny. The actual contractor never showed up on the job, and Kenny was put in charge. Like a gopher? He was always nice to me. Anyways, a few months after they have finally finished the addition on our house, it took about 2.5 years. Kenny's name is published in the newspaper. He was put in prison for charges of pedophilia. Before he worked at our house, he had been on a list of offenders. The contractor found this detail about his employee unnecessary to share with my parents. I was an elementary-aged girl at the time. My brother was in middle school. My parents would leave us home alone with the workers there on occasion. Thinking about this still gives me the creeps. I cannot.
I was 16 and woke up in the middle of the night to seeing my clothes being rustled about in my doorway. After washing my clothes, I like to hang dry them on my door frame. I notice some gray veiny looking legs and then I see these long pointed sticks moving through my clothes. It took me a second, but my sleepy eyes adjusted to see one of the most grotesque demons-looking men I have ever seen. He was extremely skinny and had a distended stomach, his skin was gray and veiny, and those long sticks were his fingers. His chin was long, his eyes had no lids on them and were unusually big. His tiny mouth was in a pucker and moved like he was eating an imaginary lollipop, his hunchback looked as though it tore out of the strange hospital gown he was wearing. He just stared at me, and I tried to scream my grandmother awake who was sharing a room with me for the weekend. He would not stop staring, and I stared back and tried to shake my grandmother awake. I started noticing other things about him like how large and cone-like his head was and how hairless and shriveled he looked as he stood still, surprised I could see him. My grandmother woke up, looked towards the door, and he was gone. In the weeks leading to this encounter, I had been experiencing strange things in my house, like my bedroom door slamming and locking on its own. One night I woke up to what felt like several hands touching my feet and legs and horrible nightmares. After the experience with this strange gray man, I told my parents, and they had my room exorcised. If an exorcism really made those horrible things stop or gave me peace of mind from things I was manifesting myself. All I know is I do not experience those things anymore and I will never sleep with a door open again. It is not something I tell people daily, but when I was little, I am going to say 7 or 8, I woke up to a banging on the window. At first, I figured it was just the wind and tried to shrug it off to go back to sleep, but I kept hearing footsteps in my room. My room had a large enough area for you to walk in circles in front of my bed. You know, the kind of noises that are just supposed to be the house settling in. It sounded like someone was circling my room. I used to sleep with the radio on, and at this very moment it was playing a very depressing song, that I cannot remember the name of, but if I hear it on the radio, I get the creeps still. So that really started to scare me. The room also felt as if it was getting colder. At this point I was really scared. I decided to make a run for it to my parents' room down the hall. As I passed through the area where the foots were, I got so incredibly cold that I could see my breath and I froze for a sec only to hear the words, "I'm lost." I bolted to my parents' room, hid under their bed and cried myself to sleep. When I was about 13 years old, our dog ran away from home. This happened a few times, as the gate in the back was left open due to family members being careless and not ensuring it closed all the way, and she got out, usually not a big deal. The neighborhood we were in was a pretty okay neighborhood and I could usually find her not that far away sniffing at things, usually in the alleys behind houses, as that's where people set out their trash, etc. She was just curious, and the minute she'd see me she'd drop whatever she was after and come straight to me. We'd head home, no biggie. This one time it happened, though, I went looking for her and could not find her. I started to get a bad feeling and kept looking. Probably a good 6 blocks away, further than she'd ever roamed before, was an area with a bunch of townhomes/rental properties. She'd never gone that far before and I was nearly in tears, ready to give up and go home to wait for her to hopefully find her way back this time instead, as I'd been out probably for almost an hour trying to find her at this point, walking around, when I saw some slight movement behind a wooden fence, and thought I heard a yip. In this random person's backyard was my dog. She was muddy and wet, and they had chained her to a post in the yard. She was pulling at the chain, barking, and trying to get to me. It was far away, so I assumed that the people had decided to take her, and having seen her running around or something. I knew it was her because she was my dog, and I knew it was her, and she had her collar on. I will never forget what happened next. I rang the doorbell. An older man, Asian, opened the door after I rang the bell a second time, having given it a good 20 seconds, and hearing people inside yelling/talking. "Yes," he said, looking at me through a crack in his door. "Hi, My name is absolutely no shame and I'm here about my dog. I'm so happy you found her and thank you for getting her off the streets. He looked at me suspiciously. What dog? He said, staring at me. What? My dog. The little white dog you have in your backyard? I replied. I was starting to get really creeped out at this point. We have no dog here, he said and tried to close the door on me. That man. I stopped the door with my foot. The dog in your backyard. Right there. I was getting louder at this point as I was starting to panic a little. I pointed towards his backyard and my dog started to bark frantically. He looked in the direction I was pointing, looked back at me, made a disappointed or annoyed grimace and said, "Oh, that dog." Unconvincingly. Then he left the doorway. I was totally mystified and more than a little frightened at this point. So I went back around to the yard and was ready to climb over the fence and just take my dog back myself when he came to the patio door of his yard, stepped into the yard with her. She cowered far, far away from him I noticed, and unchained her from the post, then stepped over and opened his gate. She booked it to me and leaped into my arms as I kneeled to meet her, and the old man just wordlessly walked back inside with a scowl on his face. I have no idea what would have happened if I had not wandered out that far to find her, but he did not seem to have any intention of returning her or calling the pound or anything. Her collar had her license tag/information on it as well as her owner's information on another tag, so his family could have dealt with it, but it did not seem like they had any intention of doing so. I got the worst feeling from that guy. After that, if she ever got out of the yard again, she was never more than about 50 feet from the house/fence boundaries. We even found her waiting patiently outside the gate to the backyard, once. My grandfather's company, does timber, mining, was setting up an office in a remote part of a third-world county and found a house that was dirt cheap, even for third-world country standards. Obviously, there was a catch. The villagers in that area told him not to purchase it since the house was haunted and everyone who had ever lived there died violently. He decided it was just some superstitious BS and got it anyway. So, the guy setting up the office will live on the top floor of the house with this family and the lower floors for the office. He moved in with his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, my grandfather suddenly got no news from him for the longest time. Since this was in a remote part of a third-world country, he was not too worried since he just assumed they lost power or something. He finally contacted the local police to go check on the guy since he was completely unreachable. They found everyone dead. The guy killed his wife, kids, and then himself with a machete. Yes, not a gun. A machete. He hacked himself to death. It was not one of those cuts on the wrists to let everyone slowly bleed to death. Everyone was hacked down, including the guy himself. The description of the scene had to be an exaggeration since I'm assuming the sight of 5 decapitated bodies, including 3 kids, were scary enough to make people see things, so I won't bother putting it here since I'm not sure what's true and there were details that people could not have witnessed. Let us just say I stopped paying attention after I heard the phrase, magic machete. I was told the entire room was covered in blood, including the ceiling. Some people were saying the blood on the ceiling had to have gotten there because the spirits threw the bodies around. I had to explain about blood pressure and got tons of weird looks. Now, the weird part, if this is not weird enough, was that he managed to barricade the door with the bed, with his wife and kids on it. And it is one of those gigantic old beds that is extremely hard to move. The locals say this is evidence he was possessed by spirits. I say moving to the middle of nowhere in some third world country drove the guy nuts, and crazy people can do all sorts of crazy stuff and even perform crazy feats of strength. Anyway, my grandfather had to pay a few bribes to make sure nothing gets to the press, not hard, middle of nowhere, about the entire thing and get the police to classify the deaths as natural. No idea how they will explain that third world countries are awesome. All employees aware had to sign an NDA too. He then tried getting other volunteers to set up the office. Even if they have not heard all the gory details because of my grandfather's gag order, everyone knew the previous guy died. No one volunteered. He promoted one guy, gave him a fancy title, and told him he oversees setting up that office. The guy quit.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.